share the screen with our text so that you can look at something other than just me. Are place that. Look at that. Record time, all done by 12 o'clock. No problem at all. Scroll back up to the top just so we can do a little recap when it's time to start. When it's time. There we go. All right, almost there. Let's get a little more tea. Yeah, we'll call that enough time for people to log in. So let's go ahead and get going. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining either by Zoom or by YouTube or watching this recording sometime in the future. It is great to have you studying together. And as I have said from the beginning of this series, it is not an easy topic. And so showing up to wrestle with these topics is incredibly important. And you should feel very good about yourself for diving into one of the deepest parts of Jewish thought that can have the most implications for the most aspects of our life. Case in point, last week we looked into the concept of the evil inclination. I'm not a big fan of that English translation, but it's the one that's most used. In Hebrew, it's called the Yetzer Hara. And as we looked at last week, we needed to discuss this within the context of suffering, because the prior session, we had talked about Rambam's analysis of suffering. And he pointed out that there are three primary causes, one of which is that we are fragile, breakable human beings, and that this explains an awful lot of the more, shall we say, predictable forms of suffering, such as old age, illness, injury, things like that. But then he also delineated that there are two other types of causes of suffering, one being the bad decisions of other people, and the third being the bad decisions we make for ourselves, which means that we have to understand why we and others make bad decisions. We will come back to that first category, the presence of physical suffering that is not caused by any one person's choice or decision in a later class. But I wanted to focus on the Yetzer Hara because this is something that there is easier guidelines for how we can work with this in order to minimize the suffering to ourselves and others. It is, pardon the expression, low-hanging fruit, which is to say it is a concept that when we apply ourselves to it, we can begin to make some immediate changes to ourselves, which will have an immediate effect on our own quality of life and the quality of life of others. So it's not going to solve it all. This is a perpetual problem and something that we will all need to struggle with. As we're going to see in our discussion today, the Yetzer Hara is part of our existence and not something that can be just eventually totally neutralized 100%. We looked at that concept a lot last week as we discussed the midrash within the Talmud of when our ancestors tried to capture and kill the Yetzer Hara, how that didn't work. So in order to understand it, we have to understand what it does in the world. And then from that point of view, how we can then approach it. Because like we discussed last week, we can't ever hope to be completely 100% Yetzer Hara free. And indeed, that may not even be desirable. On that point, we look at Bereshit Rabbah, and we read from the Midrash there. Rabbi Nachman bar Shmuel bar Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, behold, it was good. This is very good, excuse me. This is referring to the good inclination, the Yetzer Hatov, the inclination towards doing what is right. And behold, it was very good, which was is also talking about the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara. The rhetorical question is, of course, is the evil inclination then very good? Well, this rhetorical question that is answered by saying, rather, were it not for the evil inclination, a man would never build a house, would never marry a wife, would never beget children, and never engage in commerce, business, or other types of activities. Likewise, in the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, Kohelet, we read, and I have considered all toil and excelling in work, that it is each man's envy of his counterpart. Now, very important to understand that they are saying the Yetzer Hara serves a function, not that it is inherently good in and of itself as a measure of life or how we should be guiding ourselves. And that distinction is something that is often very lost by many, many people. You'll hear people say, if I'm the devil's child, then the devil's child I'll be. If it feels good, it must be right. If I want it, it must be okay. Because, I am a good person, and therefore even the parts of me that seem less desirable must have a place in the world and must be perfectly approved. Now, that is not what this midrash is trying to tell us. It is trying to say that there is a kernel within the Yetzer Hara that indeed is a proper prod to us and to act in certain ways that can be good when directed, when managed, when handled, when reined in by that Yetzer HaTov, by our good inclination, and most importantly, by the Torah itself, by the mitzvot, by the commandments, by the ethical and moral teachings of our revelation as well as our tradition. And that we do need that little extra push for life that can then turn into something that is good. And that concept is still something that is very hard, because many people will spin one way or the other, that whatever it is I want to do must be good, so how dare you judge me? Or whatever you want must be evil, and therefore everything, all will, all desire, all passion, all wanting has to be destroyed completely. Judaism does not agree with either of those extreme positions. Instead, it says, yes, there is a spark within the Yetzer Hara that is something we can use, that we can harness for good things, and that in its essence, it can be good, but we have to deal with it very carefully. Now, dealing with it carefully, one of the first steps for doing so is to recognize that when we say Yetzer Hara, according to our tradition, we're actually talking about more than just that impetus, the childlike version that you often hear portrayed of just our appetites. Yes, our appetites are wrapped in it, but that is not the essence of it. Instead, we look here at Bava Batra, back in the Talmud, and we read, Reish Lakish said, Satan, the evil inclination, and the angel of death are one. Now, very important to understand. When we say Satan or Satan in the English, we are not talking about the Christological or other pop culture references to Satan, the devil, and all of the the horns and the tail and the pitchfork. Forget all of that. Right? You can go back to our discussion on Job in the early portions of this series, where we talk about Satan, and we're going to be quoting from Job here in just a second. Satan is a role within the metaphor of God's heaven, where there is an accuser. There is somebody that is accusing humanity, of not being very good, and therefore deserving of God's justice and punishment, as opposed to God's mercy, forgiveness, or patience. So that is the role of Satan, and that is why he's important in this concept, the evil inclination, and then, of course, the angel of death. Angel of death is going to figure prominently very soon in the story of Exodus, as we are in that portion of the Torah at the moment. And when we talk about the angel of death, we are not talking about the malevolent force that is often portrayed in pictures. We are talking about the natural extinguishing of life that does happen at multiple different times. Now, let's see what the proof text is of these three being the same. And then we'll talk about what Reish Lakish is trying to teach us about these three by bringing them together as a singular concept. So first, the proof that they are linked. He is the Satan, right? Remember, it is a job description, not a proper name. He is Ha-Satan. And what does Satan do? According to the commentary, he seduces people and then accuses them, meaning that Satan encourages people to say, look, go ahead and do what's wrong. Do what's wrong. You're only human. It's okay to give in. And then once we do, he goes, aha, see, God, see what that guy did. I told you humans aren't very good. You should punish him. He deserves to be punished. He is wicked. Right? So that is how he is going for this concept of Satan here. And what's his proof? As it is written, so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with vile swords. This is from Job 2. And in context, of course, Satan is trying to prove that Job is not actually a righteous person in and of himself, but is only a good person because he has only experienced good. And that should he experience evil, especially evil against himself, then that will provoke Job into betraying God and becoming wicked. So he is trying to instigate that revelation of Job's true character so that it can be revealed that Job is not as righteous as he appears. In that way, he is, like I said, our adversary, our Satan. He is not the adversary of God, but the adversary of people. And you can see that that is a form of pushing Job in a bad direction, or in a direction where his badness becomes more likely to occur. In the same way, we also have that this is the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, and we have proof of this because it is written there. Now in the book of Genesis 6, the impulse and thoughts of his heart was only continuously evil. So we know from this discussion right before the flood of Noah that God is pointing out that humanity seems to be perpetually beset by this desire to do things that are wrong. And this is what is creating the horrible conditions on earth. And that precipitates the flood, which I have had much else to say in other sermons, so I won't repeat it here. But the idea here is that it seems like this is a natural part of humanity, that humanity just has this inclination towards doing things that are wrong. Now, you'll notice that that seems to imply that this is entirely internal, as opposed to Satan, which is implied that it is entirely external. Well, we need to add one more component, and then, like I said, we'll try and harmonize these three. And that last component comes again from the book of Job. And it is written there, only upon himself do not put forth your hand. That is to say, the verbal analogy between only teaches that the evil inclination is to be identified with Satan. So only and only, this is what's known as a Gezerah Shava. This is a rabbinic technique for exegesis, for analyzing texts, by finding same words in different passages and using the information of one to inform the explanation of the other. So here, back in Job 1, we see that God tells Satan, only upon himself do not put forth your hand. Chapter 2, he does, but in the first chapter, Satan's actions and his provocations are prefaced by this phrase, only. Well, likewise in Genesis 6, we have this phrase that the impulse of his thoughts of his hearts, was only evil continuously. So that only in Job is referring to Satan's provocations. Therefore, the only that is found within the book of Genesis is being argued is also coming from that same source, that they are two different descriptions of the same phenomenon. And we can tell that by the parallel in language. We can do a whole nother class on rabbinic midrashic logic and how this works. But for now, understand that that's Reish Lakish's explanation. And then finally, to come to the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. He, that is to say, this force, is also the angel of death. As it is written, only spare his life. Again, we have another only, now from Job 2. And apparently, Job's life depends upon him, meaning to say, the Satan. And accordingly, the Satan must also be the angel of death. if the entity that God is speaking to is responsible for Job's death, such that God would tell him, don't kill him, only spare his life, well, then that implies that this is also the angel of death, which is also only the evil inclination, which is also only the Satan, the adversary. Okay, now, why in the world go through this torturous collection of verses and logical, we'll call them stretches. That's fine. Like I said, we can talk more about the rabbinic justifications for these interpretations another time. But even if we accept that they are likely to be true interpretations, it's unclear what exactly Reish Lakish wants us to take away from this. Are we supposed to just say, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. Satan, Yetzer Hara, angel of death. Okay, yeah, I guess they're the same thing. And then turn the page and move on? No. Reish Lakish is trying to help us understand that the very part of us that is inclined towards doing wrong is getting us in trouble, is bringing about judgment and punishment on us because of our actual misdeeds. That is to say, we were tempted to do what was wrong because it felt like a good idea at the time, but that is going to come back to judge us because of the consequences of our behavior, of our violation of the ethics and morals and actions of Torah, and that will precipitate suffering, which is to say, death. That all of this is interconnected. You are doing yourself a disservice if you think that all of these are separate concepts. And indeed, this is one of the traps that we often fall into when we rationalize and justify our own bad behavior. We think, oh, it's not such a big deal. I took an extra $20 out of the petty cash at work. I mean, I needed it. It was important. It was, I didn't have money for gas. And if I'd asked, that would have been embarrassing. And okay, fine, maybe I didn't plan well, and that's why I ran out of gas, or maybe it was someone else's fault, but I'm trying to fix it without drawing attention to it. You can justify that theft, that $20, very easily. That's the Yetzer Hara. But by doing so, the Yetzer Hara has set you up to now be in the vulnerable position in the eyes of God as having broken this commandment of don't steal. Very, very clear-cut mitzvah that we are breaking. No matter how much we try to say it's only a loan, I'm just borrowing it, I'll pay it back soon. We all know that taking something without the person's permission is theft. So what's going to happen? Well, now there is one more point against us in the scale of judgment. There is now one more thing for God to consider when deciding whether to be more patient or more compassionate for us, and we have gotten ourselves into that trouble. And likewise, the continued action in this way is going to continually degrade our life, coming in small measures, certainly to start, but ultimately leading to our suffering, both physically, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and eventually, of course, in a way that will lead us to expiring in a much inferior condition than we otherwise would have been. That it is not simply a matter of, justifying it to myself for today, that we are setting ourselves up for failure at that moment, and we are setting ourselves up to perpetuate failure, and we are generating the conditions that will allow our self-inflicted suffering to become right. And whether we wish to admit it or not, we are also setting up conditions that will cause suffering for others as well. That the consequences of our action will lead to misery for others as well as punishment for ourselves. That there is no little deed, there is no minor thing, that every act that we commit is connected to life itself. And that concept is one that is at the heart of what Judaism is all about, that life is about the choices we make. Life is about the journey that we are on. The decisions that we make are never trivial. Obviously, there are still more important decisions versus less important decisions, But even the most minor decision, such as what am I going to eat today, we have been guided by Torah to make decisions that we will eat in a way that is not just mechanically in keeping with Torah by observing kashrut, but is also spiritually in keeping in Torah, that we are not eating from something that was stolen or produced with someone else's labor that was exploited or treated badly, that we are considering the needs of others while we are also feeding ourselves, that there are so many other layers to even the simplest deed of what am I having for lunch, that when considered and acted upon, create a better life for us and a better life for others. And that's the point. Judaism sanctifies life through the decisions that we make, which have been guided by the commandments and teachings of our faith. This is why when we commit a mitzvah, when we are performing a special deed of a commandment, we say that Asher Kidishanu, that God has sanctified us, but mitzvotav, through the commandments. These commandments, which we are at this moment showing that we choose to observe, that these make our lives holy. And that elevation of our life through the acts that we commit into greater and greater moments of sanctity is exactly the reason that our soul is here in this life right now. And this teaching from Reish Lakish, confusing though it is trying to help us understand that by zooming out a little bit, and rather than thinking of that little moment of temptation as being a trivial thing, seeing that this is actually part and parcel of the entirety of the reason of our existence. And through that knowledge, we can steady ourselves to make better choices. Because it is most often, for the average person, it is most often through our diminishment of the importance of our deeds that we come to make mistakes. When we think that I don't matter, what I'm doing doesn't matter, what I'm doing is trivial, that is when we are most likely to transgress. The average person, if you were to give them an opportunity to steal $100 million with reasonable risk of being caught, would absolutely not do it. But the same person with $5 sticking out of a colleague's purse at work that they could easily swipe and go, many more people would be tempted to do that because they could convince themselves that it wasn't really that bad, that it wasn't really that important. And by doing so, we, of course, create the ripe conditions for our own life to be plagued by many, many problems that will be not a knock-on effect of this sort of attitude. What's a little gossip going to hurt? It's not like I'm stabbing anyone. So I insulted that person, or maybe I used a slur or laughed at somebody that was disabled. I mean, it's not like I made them disabled. It's not like I'm some sort of criminal for doing this. And while in some cases it may not reach a level of criminal culpability, the fact is we fall easily into the trap of justifying our worst impulses when we feel that our impulses are trivial rather than significant. And as Reish Lakish points out, everything we do, every decision that we make is intimately linked with life and death, with our relationship with God and ourselves and each other. There is no such thing as an insignificant moment in the brilliant and far too short lives that we have. All right, with that from Reish Lakish, let's go ahead and take a look at Sefer HaChinuch. Those of you who have studied Torah with me in my other classes will know that I am a good fan of Sefer HaChinuch, not that he is always the majority opinion or universal opinion of Judaism. Like every commentator, there's always much that we can debate and discuss. There is no final version of how we must interpret, but he often will provide an insightful and comprehensive summary of many of the concepts that we have. And this is his summary and concept of that idea we had that we talked about last week with regards to our tzitzit, our fringes on the corner of our talit, when we are seeing them and reminded of our covenant with God, so that we do not, as he put it, wander after the thoughts of our hearts and vision of our eyes. As I mentioned last week, really the word wander is probably better rendered in English as to whore, to engage in a much more vibrant verb than wander. So that's the mitzvah that he's talking about, to not wander after the thoughts of the heart and visions of the eyes. And then, as is his way, he will try to explain what that mitzvah entails in a general way. So the mitzvah is that we not wander after the thoughts and heart and the vision of our eyes, as it is stated from Numbers 15:39, do not wander after your hearts and your eyes. Having explained or having given that title, he then gets into the main meat. The content of this negative commandment is that we were prevented from dedicating our thoughts to think about opinions that are antitheticals to the ones on which the Torah is built, as that may lead one to apostasy. All right, so point number one, we should not let ourselves go after the thoughts of our hearts and the longing of our eyes. So what does that mean? Sefer HaChinuch argues that what it means is that although the thoughts will occur to us, that we are not able to completely purge these intrusive thoughts and suggestions from parts of our psyche, that we should not dwell upon them, that we should not dedicate our thoughts to thinking about those types of things. Now, while in general, as we'll see, he'll talk about this in more detail, Judaism does not police our mind, meaning that we are not held responsible, culpable for our thoughts. This, he is arguing, is something that we are responsible for trying to resist, that we shouldn't deliberately give more time to these thoughts than just knowing that they're going to pass through from time to time. You see the $5 on the desk and you think about taking it, that's perfectly fine. Sitting down and working out a plan, well, now you are creating a condition that is going to make it more likely that you behave badly. Now, the first concept, of course, of this is that we should avoid apostasy, that is to say, the rejection of Judaism as a religion and the worship of other gods. Rather, what should we do instead? If the spirit to pursue these bad opinions should arise, the thought happens, right? You see somebody's idol or image of another religion, and you think, oh, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, that happens. If it happens, one should minimize his thinking about them and redouble his efforts to contemplate the true and good ways of the Torah. So you see somebody else's religion, and you go, that TV show where they're all running around dancing and singing about, whatever, they got some pretty good rhythm there, and it's a really nice song. That's nice. But you know what? Torah, and then you start reminding yourself about the joys, the beauties, and the goodness that comes from a life of Judaism. You're not a bad person for commenting internally or thinking that there is something nice about other things you have seen. It is about not pursuing those thoughts, but instead using them as an opportunity to remind, reinforce, and well, as he puts it, redouble your understanding and your connection to Judaism. Similarly, one should not pursue the things he sees. All right, so if we're talking about our heart, that's our thoughts. When we're talking about our eyes, now we're talking about the other things in the world. And included in this is that we not pursue after the desires of this world, meaning the physical world. For in the end, they are evil, and there is much shame and wrath. All right, now that may sound a little harsh and a little different than what we have talked about, but the term evil here, again, we have to try to get away from the usage of that term within colloquial English. Evil here does not mean rubbing your hands together, twirling the mustache, and kicking puppies. Evil here means bad, meaning that it's the opposite of good, not always in a moral sense, but just in a, this is not the way life is meant to be. This makes life worse, less satisfying, less comfortable, less fulfilling. It's not good. So for example, if we were to say in this terminology, poverty is evil, it doesn't mean that somebody who's poor is immoral. It means that if somebody is poor, it is harder for them to have a fulfilling, satisfying, and nice life. Not impossible by any means. I come from a poor family, and I know that absolutely not only can you be moral, but you can still thrive. But it is harder. It is more difficult. So the usage of the term evil here is talking about the degradation of the circumstances of life, not necessarily only about the moral qualities of that life. And that's why he can follow up by saying, there is much shame and wrath, that if we are only pursuing what is of this world, which in the end are just going to fall apart and break and be dust, but if we make that our focus, just going after whatever we see, oh, I like that car, I like that bag, I like that watch, that in the end we end up with shame and anger. How does he know this? Well, this is the meaning of what they say, may their memories be blessed, in Brachot 12b, meaning, oh, I'm sorry, thought I had muted my phone. This is what we see in Brachot 12b, portion of the Talmud. Do not stray after your heart, refers to apostasy, like we talked about, of rejecting Judaism. And after your eyes refers to licentiousness, meaning to sexual impropriety. As it is stated in Judges 14, and Samson said to his father, take her for me, as she is right in my eyes. And Samson is a wonderful character, but not exactly a wonderful person. And as we can see here, he sees her and he starts wanting her, and then he decides he wants to marry her. And this leads to a whole cascade of problems between himself and the Philistines, and obviously ultimately to his own death. And it's almost by happenstance, if you will, coincidence, afterthought, or by divine orchestration, that he was able to help the Jewish people, because really all he was trying to do was satisfy his own desires. Now, the root of this commandment, that we not wander after the thoughts of our hearts and the visions of our eyes, is revealed as through it a person is protected from sinning against God all his days. That when we remind ourselves of this commandment, we create a barrier between ourselves and transgression. This commandment is really a fundamental principle in the religion, as evil thoughts are the progenitors of impurities, and the actions are their descendants. So when we allow ourselves to dwell on these thoughts, when we give these thoughts more ammunition, when we feed them, then we eventually end up with some form of transgression. Again, it's not saying that the thoughts themselves are entirely under our control. We are all constantly awash with different thoughts that are bubbling through our minds, and that's not a bad thing at all. As we saw last week and at the beginning today, some of those thoughts and impulses are things that can be useful, but to dwell on them, to lust after them, to pursue those types of thoughts that we know are flawed and incorrect, well, that is going to get us into trouble. And if a person dies before having children, there is no record of the progeny. So it emerges that this prevention is the root that all good comes from. I know that analogy doesn't seem really clear, so let me explain. He's saying, look, if I told you that Frank had passed away before he had a kid, then you'd know that Frank had left nothing behind of his family tree, of his lineage. So too, if I told you that the thought occurred, but was then cut short, I didn't dwell on it, didn't continue to focus on it, didn't develop it, then you'll know that there will be no actions that come from it, because it was just a passing thought. And that's what we try to ensure, that the worst thoughts that we may have always remain merely passing thoughts. And if they remain passing thoughts, then they give birth to no children. And if they give birth to no children, then there is no impact from those passing thoughts. And thus good will be the result, because we will keep ourselves free of the consequences of pursuing our what we see and pursuing what we think in ways that are inappropriate. He continues, understand, my son, and let it be a jewel in your mouth, that which they, may their memory be blessed, said, from Pirkei Avot, one sin leads to another, and one commandment leads to another. Meaning that as you act, it will make the next action easier if it is similar. So if you are acting appropriately, then it becomes easier and easier and easier to continue in that way. If, on the other hand, you commit a transgression, it becomes easier and easier to continue in that way. As if you allow yourself to fulfill your evil desire one time, you will be drawn after it many times. This doesn't mean that, you made one mistake and you're stuck forever. It just means that there will be a draw that will come after that first submission. When you give into it once, you are going to be pestered multiple times because of that giving in, that surrender. And that means you will have to fight that battle a few more times than if you had stopped it at the first moment. This isn't saying that your life is over and you're stuck that way. It just means once you go downhill, it takes a little more effort to go back uphill. But if you merit to be mighty in the land and to conquer your evil inclination and close your eyes from seeing evil one time, it will be easier for you to do so many times. So again, the same way works in the positive. Every time you turn away from something that you know is wrong, see people that are gossiping, you see somebody or something in the world around that is obviously designed to be disgustingly provocative, you turn away from it, it gets a little easier to do that again next time, and a little easier the time after, and a little easier the time after. That when we refrain from doing what is wrong, when we actually just try to discount those thoughts and those temptations, it becomes easier to ignore them the next time as well. They still will occur, but the pull of it will become diminished. As he explains by comparison with drink, as lust pulls the body like wine draws the drinker, that when drinkers can never be sated by wine, but they will rather have a great desire for it. And according to the large quantity that they have gotten themselves accustomed, the stronger their desire will become. That somebody who is truly addicted to alcohol will find that they need more and more alcohol to feel even temporarily satisfied. That there isn't this will be enough and then I'll stop having more. I can stop anytime I want. It's not a problem for me. I'm not addicted. I don't have alcoholism. That's not the way it works. When you have truly allowed yourself to be pulled after something like alcohol or other temptations, then not only will you never feel satisfied as you pursue that temptation, but you will need more and more to even begin to feel like you are getting at any amount that could be considered enough. And if only they would drink a cup of water, it would temper the burning fire of their desire for wine and make it pleasant for them. That may not be the best advice for dealing with alcoholism or other forms of temptation, but his point is not that this is the cure. Every time you want a drink of wine, just have some water. While that is true, that can be helpful, the metaphor that he is going for is that if you want the wine in the initial place and you choose not to, but to have something in its stead that is good and better for you, then over time, your amount of desire for that which is wrong will eventually be curtailed, that you will find it easier and easier to also resist. And that is one of the points that is hard to always wrestle with, but very important, which is to say that we can curtail the amount that these ideas occur to us, and we can strengthen our ability to not give in to the thoughts when they occur. And those two are not always linked together. That is to say, depending upon the person and depending upon whatever it is that they have a longing for, sometimes it is about building up a strength against it, despite that temptation happening again and again and being very strong. And for others, it is about diminishing the temptation completely, and thus not needing a massive ability to resist because they have been able to avoid that temptation more and more. Both can work hand in hand, but they can also work independently of each other. And it really depends upon the person and the individual issue that they are wrestling with. Continuing, he says, the same is true here. The more a person allows himself to be governed by his desires and to allow them to become habit, the stronger his evil inclination becomes every day. But in his preventing himself from them, he will always be happy with his portion every day. And he will see that God made people straight, but they seek out many schemes for no reason at any point. And the no reason here means that when we sit back and recognize how futile it is and how not to our benefit it is, then we can see that it is not reasonable that we would give in to those desires. And you'll also notice the Jewish concept that God made us good. God made us capable of good and made us want to have good, while we simultaneously have the thoughts and desires that will, if allowed to run away, will cause bad. That is not our essential nature. That we are not only pursuing evil, we are not only capable of evil. That we have incredible potential within us for good and to resist even that which might be the most tempting to us individually. Now, he continues by saying, oh, I get that all in one screen. He always finishes any of his analysis of a mitzvah by explaining whether or not the mitzvah is still applicable in our day and to whom that mitzvah is applicable if it is still there. And this commandment is practiced in all places, meaning both inside the land of Israel and outside, and at all times. It is not locked only to the ancient world or only when the temple stands, and it is practiced by men and women. It is not gender bound at all. And one who transgresses it and dedicates his thoughts to these topics that we mentioned, that causes a person to abandon the views of our perfect pure Torah and to partake of the view of the empty heretics that are bitter and evil, or if he wandered after his eyes, that is, he chased the desires of the world, for example, if he constantly attempts to maximize great delights for himself without any attention paid to some positive gain that could be realized from it, meaning that he does not do it in order to be healthy and be able to strive in the service of his creator, but just to maximize delights for himself. And yes, I really wish he knew what a period was. He is a master of very, very long sentences. So let me just make sure that you got all of the caveats you had there. Right? If somebody dedicates their thoughts, so this is not the thought just passed through. This is you are chasing after this thought and chasing after the thought to abandon Torah. That's wrong. That's bad. Don't chase after those thoughts. They may occur. That's okay. That's normal. You don't chase them. And two, chasing after the desires of the world. If there is some meaningful benefit through it, meaning you have to stay healthy, meaning I want to have food, perfectly fine desire, or I want to have a family, that's a fulfillment of a mitzvah, then that's fine. But if you're only chasing after your personal desires just to maximize the pleasure for yourself, a purely hedonistic lifestyle, then anyone who follows this path has violated this negative commandment constantly whenever he is involved in what we have said. Now, so that's the basic parameters of when you know you have broken this commandment. But we do not administer lashes for this negative commandment. Flogging was a common punishment for the violation of the more the commandments that the negative commandments that didn't have other punishments attached to them, such as murder, because there is no specific thing for which the transgressor can be warned, as man is made in such a way that it is impossible for his eyes not to sometimes see more than what is fitting, and it is similarly impossible for his thought not to sometimes go beyond what is fitting. So it is impossible to limit a man with clear boundaries about this. Judaism believes that you don't get punished in that physical way, in the ancient world flogging, unless there was room to clearly warn a person, don't do X. If somebody is stealing, it's very clear to tell them what not to do. This is something that we can't lay down that kind of precise guidelines. How do you tell somebody, don't think about desiring your neighbor's wife when you happen to accidentally see her on the roof of a building? I'm talking, of course, about King David and Bathsheba. He didn't go looking for her. He wasn't, getting out the telescope to try and peep on his neighbors. But he just happened to be on the roof, and she happened to be there. And then, well, that led to a bit of a problem. I mean, he pursued that thought and allowed it to consume him, such that he engaged in actions that are questionable at best, to be very euphemistic. So We can't give that proper warning in the details, but we can give in general the advice, don't pursue those thoughts. They're going to happen. It doesn't make you a bad person that you had those thoughts. It doesn't make you wicked or evil, even if you thought of something which, if you acted upon, would be wicked or evil, as long as you choose not to persist, not to pursue, not to dwell on that, and definitely, of course, not to act on it. So you're not a bad person for having bad thoughts, but it is something that we can still resist. It is something we can still shape ourselves and try to guide ourselves away. Now, we're just going to finish up with something that is not from the Jewish canon, but is instead from The Lord of the Rings, written by Tolkien. So in the book Return of the King, this doesn't happen in the movie, unfortunately, because we don't get internal dialogue the same way. But in the book Return of the King, there is a moment where Sam, the friend of Frodo, who is the main person carrying this ring of power that is corrupting Frodo, has to take the ring, and then he has to decide what to do with it. And in this little passage that Tolkien wrote, it was a remarkable insight into how a person might be corrupted, but also some of the ways that we can help guide ourselves away from that kind of corrupting thought. This is Sam, his thoughts turned to the ring, but there was no comfort there, only dread and danger. No sooner had he come in sight of Mount Doom, where he's supposed to destroy the ring, burning far away, than he was aware of a change in his burden. As it drew near the great furnaces where, in the deeps of time, it had been shaped and forged, the ring's power grew, and it became more fell, untamable, save by some mighty will. As Sam stood there, even though the ring was not on him, but hanging by its chain about his neck, he felt himself enlarged, as though he were robed in a huge, distorted shadow of himself. A vast and ominous threat halted upon the walls of Mordor. He felt that he had from now only two choices: to forbear the ring, though it would torment him, or to claim it and challenge the power that sat in the Darkhold beyond the Valley of Shadows. So he has this option. He can give in to that temptation. He can claim that ring for himself and become this mighty and dark person, or it will still be there, tempting him, tormenting him, but he can forbear it. He can choose not to give in. And already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Barad-dûr. That's the main tower where the main villain Sauron is living. And then all the clouds rolled away in his victory, and the white sun shone, and at his command the valley of Gorgoroth, that's the area, became a garden of flowers and trees and brought forth fruit. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own. And all this could be. All right, so that's the image. You'll notice that this is not wicked. The image of the temptation of the ring is, if you do it, I'm sure you'll be able to make good things happen. You'll get rid of the evil Sauron, and you'll be able to turn this horrible place into a garden, into a beautiful place, and everyone will be behind you. Our thoughts are not always presented to ourselves, we don't always present within ourselves. We don't always think wicked thoughts in wicked ways. That is to say, when we think about, well, maybe I should help myself to a little bit more by embezzling from the company, we don't think of it as embezzling. We think of it as, well, they passed me over for that raise that I really deserved. And if I had that money, I'd be able to help my family or be able to help my nonprofit that I support, the charities I want to do. And it's really important in we come up with very good reasons to do what is wrong. And we don't tell ourselves it's wrong, because if we did, it'd be very easy to resist. And likewise here, Sam is faced with this desire to do what he knows would be good, but to do so in a way that would be bad, and which we as the reader know, of course, will end up in badness. So how does he resist? Because he does. So how does that happen? in that hour of trial, it was the love of his master, Frodo, that helped most to hold him firm. But also, deep down in him lived, still unconquered, his plain hobbit sense. So first of all, the love of someone else meant that he had to focus on helping Frodo rather than helping himself. But also there was something in his own nature that, when he thought about it, made it easier to resist. He knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden, even if such visions were not a mere cheat to betray him. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm, his own hands to use, not the hands of others to command. And anyway, all these notions are only a trick, he said to himself. So the realization that he has, and that Tolkien captures so beautifully in this moment for Sam, is that, well, first of all, whatever I'm dreaming would never actually happen, right? The ring wants me to put it on because it wants me to be revealed, and then its true master will come, kill me, and take it. It's just a trick to make me think that I could somehow fight against Sauron. But even if I didn't have that to remind myself, even if it wasn't just about the trick, what do I want? What do I want more? What good would it be for me to have a garden the size of a kingdom? And what good would it be for me to have a garden where the gardeners weren't me, but were someone else? I want to work in my garden, and a garden that's big enough for me is all I want and need. If I try to take more, I will lose that which I actually might be willing to enjoy and might be deserving of my pleasure. Likewise, when somebody finds the right person to be with for a relationship, that can be incredibly ennobling. And then you can say, look, I want one person who I love and who loves me. I don't need a harem. I don't need hundreds of people who are clamoring for my attention and affection. I don't need to be famous in the eyes of the world. I just need to matter to them, or matter to my family or my friends or my community. That's all I need, because what would I gain by the others, and how would I have to live in order to claim that as my due? Would I need to order others around in order to create that? Would I need to deprive them of their freedom or of their rightful pursuit of their own individual happiness in order to focus them on me? Once we realize that all a person needs is relatively small, like we talked about with Rambam before, it becomes easier to resist the temptations of things that are more grandiose and which will only lead us into our own ruin. We remind ourselves that this Yetzer Hara is not there for our benefit all the time. But yes, that little fluctuation of, I should do more, I need to be active, there are things in this world that will take my effort that I must pursue. That is helpful, and it's a reasonable fuel additive to our engine. But it doesn't get the steering wheel, because all it knows is power. All it knows is more. All it knows is, I will not stop. There is no limit to what I will push for. We have to have our foot on the brake and say, no, 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 no. You were right that I needed to get up and work in my garden. That's a good thing. Thank you for that, my Yetzer Hara. But wanting more than that? No. Wanting more than that is, you can go back to bed now, because anything you try to say to convince me to want more than what is right for me, to want more than what is right for anyone, well, that's just a trick. And it's easier to resist it when we realize that it is just a trick. And if we follow it, it's not going to bring us to pleasure and to happiness. It will instead lead to many of the problems that we have been talking about. So that's our very short discussion of the Yetzer Hara. And we will continue next week talking about other forms of suffering in the world, and how we as individuals and as community can respond to other types of suffering in order to, well, make this world a much, much better place. With that, I will bid everyone a good afternoon. Continue to reflect and consider the great gift that God has given us, better than any ring, And I'll see you all next time. Take care and be